Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the podcast. This is Bootsy Greencast. I have an amazing guest today that I'm really excited to speak with, Sunil Godse. He is an author and a speaker. He has written a book. He's written a couple of books, actually, on intuitionology. We're going to take a look at that. Before we get started, I just want to go ahead and say big thanks to my friends at Content Safe for distributing this all over the internet. I really appreciate all their hard work and diligence so that this podcast can be found in the deepest reaches of the World Wide Web. And you don't have to go on the Wayback Machine, here in a couple of weeks. But Sunil has an amazing website here, intuitionology.com. I love the name. I love the message. Sunil, thank you so very much for coming on to the podcast.
A pleasure. I'm happy. It's a great start of the week for me to come on your podcast. You're doing some amazing things with what you're doing and the messaging that you're giving. It's really resonating with sort of my vibe.
That's awesome. Well, I mean, it's intuition. So I really feel like at the deepest core of ourselves, that's really where the truth is. That's where our connection to everything is. And so I'm really excited to explore intuition. Let's first just talk a little bit about how you discovered this. How did you come into really, start to study intuition itself?
Absolutely. So I wrote my first book called Fail Fast, Succeed Faster. And it was really about entrepreneurship and the hurdles. And the idea of the book was if you learned the lessons from others, then you shouldn't be failing. And so I interviewed over close to 300 people for that book, and 75 stories made it into the book. And when I used to speak on stage, one of the constant things I kept asking is, okay, give me the golden nugget as an entrepreneur that I can overcome. That's going to make me successful. And at that time, I used to roll my eyes saying, okay, listen, this is why there's 75 stories that kind of filtered through. But when I went back to the podcast interviews and listened to the stories, 80 to 90% of the people who were speaking about the failures or hurdles that they had, some reason used some language around, they knew what they should have done, trusted my intuition. I should have trusted my gut. Mm-hmm. And I'm starting to string this together and going, oh my God, like this, what is this thing called intuition? And so I sit back and I think back to, okay, when did I ignore my intuition? And so the first thing that pops up is when I ignore my intuition to go into a career. As your guest, Sunny Sharma, talked about it in 2019, where you get into the societal norms, mm-hmm. and you think and I'm South Asian, so doctor, lawyer, engineer, or the fourth is failure. So I went through door number 3, and that was engineer, and I hated it. I had 3 years in a career I shouldn't be making, I should be happy in. And at the same time, I started running as an investor, a restaurant part-time. I was making 5 times more as an investor than I was in engineering. And so 3 years later, it snapped, and I trusted my intuition to go into entrepreneurship. And $20 million later, several ventures that started me on the consulting route. The other time was there was a management consulting contract that it came through. Money was fantastic, Silicon Valley, but the contract terms are changing. And again, this feeling was saying, don't take it. But I was so enamored by the money that I went down to the States. I spent every single penny, and I came back with 25 cents in my bank account because the company didn't pay me. And perhaps the most devastating one was I was doing some coaching at the time, and a friend of mine was being stalked, and she needed some advice. And so this voice was telling me, meet with her that afternoon. But for some reason, I just said, let's meet a couple of days later. And I didn't have anything pressing. And what ended up happening is that she got shot and killed by that guy the very next day. And I knew it. And so if I look at all these things where I ignored my intuition, there was that something that was telling me what the right decision was. And I really needed to dig deep into finding what that something is. And so when I started doing some research around it, boom, I found MRIs that showed where intuition is in the subconscious area of your brain. At that time, there was 7 to 10 second delay between intuition and an action or decision. A neurology research that's going to be coming out soon is showing that that's an actual 23-second delay, much earlier than we think. And again, time and time again, what are these things called? What is this something? How does it function? How does it speak to us? And so this is when I started researching things called intuitive signals. And so each of our signals are very unique. So how, you and I can be in the exact same situation, and you would get a signal that could be the hairs on the back of your neck standing up. For me, It could be my heart just starts pounding, or I get that feeling in the gut. And what happens is we sometimes use a common term like this voice or this gut reaction, which is great. Everybody's got this common signal. But how do you know that's the first signal?
Hmm.
Maybe that's the third signal. And if it's the third signal, that means you've already made two bad decisions. So why did you ignore those two signals previous to that? So what the whole Intuitionology project is about is to educate people on, okay, this is how complex your intuition is. Here's some science if you need it. And if you don't, this is, here are the components, and this is how it works. And I get people to actually go through a 7-day challenge where they actually take the components of the intuition and they solve a problem. So here, like, let it work for you first. And once you go through that problem, you now have a template on how to solve every other problem or make every decision moving forward. And perhaps the greatest, the pinnacle moment for my Intuitionology project was a friend of mine who was, at that time, he was CEO and chairman of Cara Foods Limited. He didn't believe in intuition. This is an investment banker. He says, Sunil, you know what? I'll give you an hour. We'll talk about intuition for about 5 minutes because I don't get it. And the rest of 55 minutes, let's have a cappuccino. So I go down to Toronto to interview him. And it's very clear that the cameras are on. He's saying, yeah, I wish I could meet these people who see omens and intuition. Yeah, I just don't think it filters into your decisions. And these are his words.
Wow.
And then I'm educating him on what intuition is. And there's a component of intuition. There's 4 types of intuition. And one of the 4 types is called experiential intuition. Experiential intuition does rely on your past learning, your past data. And that's where he was, because he was an investment banker. So Excel spreadsheets, complex models was how he made decisions. And then when I started educating him, half an hour into the interview, we start talking about a time when he went against the data, and he's now getting it. And he said, yeah, you know what? There was a time I went against the data, and it ended up becoming one of his most profitable brands in his restaurant portfolio. And then at the very end of the interview, there's another one called creative intuition, and creative intuition is the fourth one of the 4, and it makes you make the decision ultimately from the other 3 types of intuition, and it could be very obtuse. So I asked him, when did you make a real crazy decision that your intuition kind of led you through? And that by this time, in an hour in, he's getting it. He understands it. He says, oh, that's an easy one. So this guy, $3-4 million a year, private jets, restaurants, limousines. He trades it all off to run this tiny bankrupt little restaurant. And everybody was thinking he was crazy. I'm sure his friends were calling their psychiatrists and psychologists to get him an appointment. But he did. He quit. And he walked into that tiny bankrupt little restaurant. That was Eastside Mario's location number 1.
Wow.
And that ended up being over 1,000 locations over 20 years, $2 billion in revenues, because of an intuitive moment, an intuitive decision. That's the power of intuition when you apply it to making decisions.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I mean, it comes as no surprise to me. Like, I know how important, intuition is. It's our heart, right? Like, and that's what's connected to infinite intelligence. And so
Absolutely.
I think it's very intriguing and fascinating. People call themselves psychic, or or whatever, like we all have different terms and expressions to describe basically our intuition. I remember when I was a kid, I don't know why this just floated up, but like right before the phone would ring, I would just get this like this, just like, I don't know even how to describe it. That's another interesting thing in this exploration, this study, because what you're dealing with here, there's not really a lot of, terminology to
Yep.
really describe these sensations, these feelings that are based in our sixth sense,
Yeah.
But I do remember, like, I would, right before the phone would ring, I would feel this like an in-breath almost, and then the phone would ring when I was a kid, little things like that. I can tell you how I've ignored red flags in relationships, businesses. I mean, the list goes on. I've made a lot of mistakes. So definitely your first book
Yeah.
about failure. I'm pretty well versed in that, but also I love outwitting the devil, the idea of temporary defeat, right? Like,
Yep.
we have a purpose that doesn't change, but the plan will, and it will shift around via temporary defeat. That disrupts the law of hypnotic rhythm, and then we shift and do a different plan. And that's basically, how that whole thing rolls out. Could you maybe go over the 4 types of intuition? I'm super
Sure.
curious. about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So we talked about experiential intuition and the creative intuition. The other two are relational intuition and situational intuition. And so what the other two pick up on, relational intuition looks at the other person. So you're looking at body language. You're looking at, it takes 7 seconds to trust someone. And within those 7 seconds, you're looking at body twitches. How's the angle? Is there a difference between the actions and the words? And it's always like a camera, like a. So if someone is good enough in convincing you initially, you're going to be consistently watching. Your intuition is going to be consistently watching to make sure that it's always consistent. And can that person be trusted for you? And so relational intuition will look at all those kind of things, even the words on a piece of paper. And what it also does is establishes a baseline. So if someone is naturally nervous, your intuition will take that as a baseline. It's the detractions from that becomes deceptive or becomes trustworthy that your intuition is picking up on. And the other one is the fourth of the four is situational intuition. It's looking at, you get into a room or a situation, you feel like is there something out of place, or is everything arranged properly, or I just sense danger, and some people can go down an alleyway and they sense it. I even interviewed someone who was blind, and her service dog went down this was a lane that she kept going down, and for some reason this one night her service dog stopped, and so her intuition was to transfer to the service dog, and she said, something's not right here, and so we're going to take a different route. So that's situational intuition coming at play. So you have all these four: creative, which is the decision; experiential; situational; relational. All four types of intuition come together in a split second that helps you make that decision. And one of the things that experiential intuition does is, the moment that you're born, it's collecting all these experiences that are relevant to you, and it stores this in the subconscious area of your brain, like a library. So if you look at your brain like or your conscious, subconscious, conscious, like an iceberg, 90% is underwater, which is your subconscious, 10% above water. And I'm speaking to the obviously to the expert here, but for those who can't really that gives you a good visual. And so all your experiences go down there. So your intuition, again, in a split second, is going to pull out those experiences that are relevant for that decision you're about to make, and it informs you, and boom, now it sends you a signal to tell you whether it's right or wrong. So is it a positive signal? And some people say it's a pull, a knowing, the dots connecting. These are common positive signals. And the negative signals, like, the hairs on the back of your neck going, seeing an orb, an omen that's a little bit darkish, even though there's no color. And in one case, an entrepreneur, his left earlobe kept getting hot every time he made a bad decision to go into a venture. Every single time. In fact, when I was interviewing him, he didn't know. He said, Sunil, I don't know what these signals are. So give me some time. So we still kept talking about it, and we started talking about his failures. Every venture he talks about, he starts grabbing his left earlobe, and he goes, I just got it. Oh my God. And now he recalls when he used to talk to his wife, his left earlobe used to get hot every time he complained about the business that he was in. And, he made decent money. And that's not the point. The point is, he was so unhappy.
Yeah.
So, and one of the things I talk about is opportunity cost. And people don't realize that opportunity cost is actually 2 times the cost. It's not just the cost of you doing the wrong thing, making the wrong decision, going into the wrong business, or whatever the case is in your life. It's also the cost of not doing the right thing. So it's actually 2 times the cost or more. So when you make a bad decision, you're really making a bad decision. That's twice, it's hurting you twice as much.
Wow. Yeah. That's really, it's like a poker tell, huh? So
Yeah.
it's like he didn't even realize, but he would grab his ear every single time. It's like
Yes.
the body knows, like the body knows. It's crazy. We get very, very wrapped up in our mind. I'm thinking a little bit back to like Power versus Force by David Hawkins.
Yes, I've got that. I'm just looking at the book right here.
Yeah. Yeah. The muscle testing,
Yes.
that he does. And I've actually tried that with sugar with a friend of mine, my buddy Will, and he was over here and he was like, dude, check it out. He's like, hold your muscle. And then he was like, now eat the sugar. And then, I couldn't hold my arm up, because it's like bizarre, but at the same time, simple. It's like, I guess simple doesn't necessarily mean easy, right?
Exactly. And the way the intuition works is the way I tell people it's just like a car, right? So it's simple in that you just turn the key, or nowadays you push the button and you drive. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have to open the hood and look at how complex it is, right? And for those who are fascinated by it, I kind of help them with that. But then what they learn about the components of it that help them make that decision, and it's very, very important. And in fact, one of the things when you were talking about it, I think you just posted a video 5 hours ago on YouTube channel. You were talking about sort of the potential. I think it was exciting potential, and you're talking about the balance, head and heart, yin yang, whatever it is.
Mm-hmm.
Your intuition's always in balance as well. So when you decide to make a bad decision, you have that exciting potential towards that bad decision, and now you're going to go through a slippery slope because all your energy is there, and if you're not careful and you take a step back, your intuition's still shining that light. You can always take a step back, look at the light, and go the right way. But oftentimes, because there's that exciting potential, people are already engaged in that, and it's a sunk cost. They go to the bad decision and the next bad decision, and it's really tough to say, but most people don't really realize the true value of intuition and its effect in helping you be successful, make successful decisions until they hit rock bottom. Uh, and
Wow.
it's unfortunate.
Yeah, it is unfortunate, but it's a lesson that we all learn. I mean,
Of course.
everybody does it. One thing that happens to me, and maybe you can speak on this a little bit, or maybe you've had some other people who have had the similar experience, is when I do make that bad decision, then I become involved in whatever that relationship, business opportunity, whatever, and then I keep going down, keep going down, keep going down, and what keeps me from being like, okay, I'm done with this. It doesn't feel right, is that I've already invested ever so much. And also I have a fear of losing what I've already built within this relationship that's really not in resonance with me.
Absolutely, and that's basically your sunk cost. It's called sunk cost theory.
Mm-hmm.
You already you've sunk the cost in terms of your money, your time, effort. But there's also 4 intuitive hurdles that what they do is they squash your ability to listen to the signals. That's all they do. They block it. They scramble it. And one is fear. And there's 3 types of fear: fear of failure, fear of the unknown, fear of change. So a lot of times people will want to go in a different direction or in a new direction, but they're afraid to take that first step, even though they know there's a positive signal, or maybe they don't because they haven't taken the time to figure out what their basket of positive and negative signals are, which is where most people are. They don't know what their signals are. So even though there's a positive signal and it feels uneasy, they feel the fear and they don't take action. So there's a lot of people with ideas, but the ideas don't come to fruition unless you take action. Everybody wants to change their life, but they don't take the action. And there was a statistic that I pulled from Harvard and Gallup. In a room full of 25,000 people that all are having their hand up saying, I want to change. These are people that are motivated to change. The number of people in that room of 25,000 people that actually take the steps to change is 1.
1 out of 25,000.
1 out of 25,000 people. And so fear is one of them. The second intuitive hurdle is ego. And there's 2 sides to ego. One side is narcissism, where you're talking because you want to be heard and you don't have that experience. And your intuition is telling you that because when you open your mouth, it's telling you to keep it shut. The other side of ego is the herd mentality. So joining societal norms, going with a group that goes against your values, better, but you still want to be popular with the clique. The one that really gets relationships, the hurdle is being too emotional. And the one that gets a lot of people when following societal norms also is being too rational. This is what my family wants. This is what society dictates. The data needs to speak for itself, even though they know that the data or their intuition is saying, that's not the step that you need to take. So when you have one of these 4 intuitive hurdles, or a couple of them impacting you, your signals are scrambled, and then you're in trouble. And so and I'll give you a really good example of what you were talking about. You're in it. One of the interviewees I had, she actually didn't want to do an interview, but she's a friend of mine. She goes, okay, I'll do it. Had lunch with her. And I said, you can talk about anything. If you don't like what we talk about, we can always take your name out, whatever. She goes, yeah, okay, let's do it. And so the first question I used to ask on my podcast interviews was, when did intuition impact your life in a bad way? Or when did you ignore your intuition? So some version of that. And so we sit down, and I said, just look at me. Don't look at the film crew behind us. Just talk to me. We'll make it conversational. And she goes, are you ready? Yeah. Start rolling. And I asked the question, and she goes, oh, yeah, I ignored my intuition and I was sexually assaulted.
Oh, Jesus.
And in the next 45 minutes, we go down this why. So it was a coworker. She wanted to be a friend. Then she makes the next thing, meets him. His voice was changing, but I got to be a good friend, and goes down the rabbit hole again. He invites her to his place. She walks in. These signals are saying, don't do it. No, but I'm here for him. He needs me. Starts walking in, blow it up, big pictures of his wife and kids on the wall, like gigantic posters. There is a red flag. No. And she starts convincing herself, beer bottles. And she keeps walking further and further and further in. And all this time, she's telling me all the signals that her intuition is saying, get out, until she gets so close and he overpowers her. And this is someone, she's a bodybuilder. So I'm pretty sure she can kick this guy's butt. But she became submissive. He sexually assaulted her. And then she tried to make it okay afterwards. I'm not an expert in coping mechanisms. I'm not saying that's right or wrong. She was saying it wasn't okay. So this is coming from her perspective. Mm-hmm. And then she justified it. And so now she listens to those signals. She's learned a number of them, a lot of red flags. So now she's a little bit more well-versed in her signals, so that when those red flags come up again, there's no way I'm going into that relationship. There's no way I'm going into that room. There's no way I'm entering that decision, because I've had this intuitive signal before that got me into a lot of trouble. And unfortunately, it's those kind of things. And we're talking about rock bottom. That's where you're going to learn the lessons, the hardest lessons, unfortunately.
Wow. Yeah, that is unfortunate. I mean, it's avoided by listening to our intuition. Wow. That's so I wanted to kind of maybe go back and talk about, you said, and this is interesting to me, like, I love the scientific aspects of all this, because it's practical, it's pragmatic, and usable. So you say that it takes 7 seconds to trust someone. Mm-hmm. I think that's very interesting. I guess I have a theory, and I'll make it simple from sort of my view, is that our hearts are communicating when we meet someone, and maybe our minds are communicating as well. And I'm wondering if maybe our hearts are communicating, and then our minds are communicating. And then when we don't trust someone, it's because they're displaying characteristics that are contradictory to what our hearts are communicating, for instance. So like they're pretending, maybe they're not incongruent, or they're not exactly portraying themselves as we are intuitionally picking up on, or something like that.
Yeah, absolutely. You nailed it. You've nailed it. And so when we're looking at a person, there's something incongruent, whether it's the way they're approaching, you've seen them talk before, whatever it is, or it's a stranger, and that stranger is approaching you. Is that stranger approaching you in a manner that is safe, that is trusting? It could even be their hearts, their minds, the way they're dressed. It takes less than half a second to see a twitch. Again, there's a baseline, but you're looking at the detractions from the baseline, and very, very quickly you're looking at that. You're going to ask certain questions. You may look at the answers, and it's pretty clear, because the moment that you and I basically connected, we've got that connection with the heart and the minds. You probably have a sense, this, I think it's going to be good, versus I don't know, there's something wrong with this person right away.
You're a creep, right?
That's
what a creep is.
and what you're going to do is, in the next 7 seconds, or sometimes a little bit more, if you need a little bit more time, you're going to figure out what type of creep that person is, right? And the other thing is, people change, right? So in relationships, people change, their values change, circumstances change. So your intuition is still always looking to those mini first impressions to say, wow, I didn't know you said that, or wow, this is a value that I didn't think you had. And just because it never came up. And so when those values cross a certain line in the sand for you, then that relationship should be over, versus being tolerant of values that are different than yours. And so this is how it all depends upon what values are line crossers or what values are tolerant. I mean, I look at me and my wife, and we're both, A-type people. She's very conservative. I'm very extroverted and very spontaneous. We have our disagreements, but our values essentially are in the same Venn diagram or subset that we can move ahead with. There's nothing obtuse about them that's saying, whoa, who did I marry here? And the problem with relationships when we get a bit too emotional is that we stick to that relationship, because I'm using that example. We convince ourselves, we talk to ourselves. Sometimes we surround ourselves with the wrong people that are giving us the wrong advice. And we know that because that person's saying something that's convincing us, that is stroking our biases. Whereas someone who's really telling you something, you saying your intuition saying that person makes sense, but we shut them out, right? And so that's where your intuition gets really nitty gritty. And this is where, frankly, this is where you have to trust it, right? Because ultimately you got to get out of that relationship. And if you don't, or is it, there's that fear, right? A couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Sarah Prout, who's now a manifestation expert. This is someone in a 10-year relationship, 40 instances of physical abuse, roof over her head. And one December 31st, her intuitive moment was saying, she's looked at the stars and says, get out. And so this is someone now who left cold turkey, 2 kids in tow, $30,000 in debt, homeless, and she was picking up furniture on the side of the road. She was going into public washrooms, putting pieces of soap together so her kids can have a clean shower, eating bread and beans for days on end. And 6 years later, she ends up running a 7-figure business on manifestation. But she was fearful, and she ignored the signs early on, like 40 times. And it was crazy. And she was telling me, before we started the podcast interview, she had a hard time talking about the relationship. And I said, I don't want to get into the relationship as much as the details, more as to what the function of your intuition was. But she did a Goldcast video. That's how I found her. And to do a 3-minute segment, it took her 6 hours to do that 3-minute segment. That's how damaging that relationship was for her. And so you can imagine how many times her intuition was telling her to get out, right? And it's unfortunate, she stayed, and luckily she trusted her intuition to open up those doors of opportunity, one after another, and trusted, even though the circumstances were not so great, but here she is.
Wow. Well, that's an amazing story. And that is a lot of abuse, and also a lot of ignoring that intuition. It makes me think, just on the topic of relationships, really, because often, you start down the relationship path with someone, or at least I can only speak from my own experience, but it's immediate, like, yeah, this isn't the right person, but you do it anyway. On the other hand, though, I've had experiences where it did feel right in the beginning. And then you go down that road for, whatever amount of time. And then all of a sudden, boom, red flag. Any thoughts as to like why that might be? Like, why would it seem like it was in resonance for some time, and then you go down? Do you think, theoretically speaking, do you think there's some reason why we find those potential people to like maybe share something of ourselves, or vice versa? They share something with us or expose us to a new idea. I don't know. I can't help but be a little bit of a hopeless romantic here.
Yeah, absolutely. So there's a couple of things there. One is, when you get the right the positive vibes or positive intuitive signals at that moment, who that person is, what that function or how you had that relationship was really, really good. What you have to realize is they also change. They also are affected by other people, other circumstances. Their values change. They could be ignoring their intuition big time, and maybe they fall prey to ego and they're in a bad circle. And this has happened to people who've gotten into gangs or surrounded by criminals, right? They turn out really great set of values, and then they change over time. And I'm using an obtuse example just to really clarify it in people's minds, but it doesn't have to be that obtuse.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But so I could be best friends with someone when I'm young, and the next thing you know, this person's going around in gangs, and I no longer know that person is. And so we're talking, and next thing you know, this guy's talking about stealing or drugs or whatever it is. It's like, wow, like you're not the same person I knew, right? So
Mhm.
he or she is always changing. You're also changing because you're being shaped by other people, and hopefully you're trusting your intuition and shaping your values. So there's this natural ebb and flow of what the relationships are, and what your intuition is doing. Just as I was saying earlier, it's like a camera, right? Lots of snapshots, and you're continually watching because you're the whole thing of what the intuition is there is to protect you from those that are going to pull you down, and to really filter your relationships so you surround yourself with only those who are going to move your life forward. These aren't yes people. These are people that are going to give you authentic, real opinions that you trust, and that they know that they have your best interest at hand. And that's an ebb and flow. There's going to be people that are coming in and going, and that's just the circle of life,
It is.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
And that's great, because some people change. I had there's a great couple we had. We were best friends for like probably about 3-4 years, and I don't know what changed. I just don't know. Something changed, and there was this looseness. There were behaviors that were really odd, and it came to a point where the relationship became one-sided between my family and theirs. And I said, this is nuts. Like, I can feel it already. I'm not sure why we keep giving not second chance, third, fourth, fifth chance, because your intuition always gives second chances. It's already done that second chance. And we prolonged it probably 6 months longer than we should have, which was okay.
Sure.
But we ended up leaving that relationship, and it just felt great, because now all that time I'm sitting worrying, I'm spending that time thinking good thoughts. Again, there's that opportunity cost. So that's sort of how ebb and flow works with that relationships. And so that way, your intuition is always trying to surround yourself with people, and it could be small. I mean, you and I would probably, but thousands of people in our lifetimes.
Sure.
I've got probably 2 or 3 that I can lean on, maybe, and probably 2 that I know. And I've got 5 that I can call. They'll be here for anything. 2 I can get a bit deeper on. That's it. Right. And I'm happy. It's quality over quantity all the time.
I totally agree with that 100%. But yeah, it's a good point. We are always changing. We're always evolving. Our values are changing as we continue to develop, as human beings. So that makes a lot of sense. I can't help, we're sold this sort of narrative. There's a lot of social sort of conditioning that is counter to what our intuition's telling us, from a very, very young age. We are kind of programmed in certain ways to expect certain things of the world, even though we already know that
Yeah.
it's not quite like that. It's really interesting to think about the complexity of the intuition, and I'd also love to. It's interesting. I was listening to a podcast last night talking about Gustave Le Bon. He wrote a book called The Crowd many, many
Okay.
years ago. It's a very old book. It's obviously he's French, but basically talking about how people in groups don't really have the same set of tools that they do in an individual sort of setting. So situationally, that makes a lot of sense. There's this sort of overwhelming energy that takes a hold of the crowd, and this is like years and years ago. It's an old book, like written in like the 20s or something like that. But as far as like pendulums go in the reality transurfing sort of methodology, understanding that we sometimes sort of just get like overtaken, or at least influenced by these big ideas that a lot of people are having, even though in that situation we might not agree entirely with what's going on. Like, I guess a lot of what we're seeing on the news and stuff, people protesting and things like that, holding to our values and basically coming away from fear, the fear of basically being ostracized or being part of the group. Any tips there as far as like how to basically stay present and congruent to your intuition, even when, like Emerson says, for nonconformity, the world whips you with its displeasure. I can't think of a more accurate quote that stuck with me since 7th grade, but that, for whatever reason, and self-reliance, when we read that, even though it was kind of a little bit advanced for me at that time, it's always, always, always stuck with me. That's probably my favorite essay of all time. But as far as like, he says that, which is great. Like, thanks for the tip, bro, but like, how can we sort of maybe try to resolve that? What are some tools that we can potentially implement to eliminate that fear and maybe open ourselves up whenever we're in a situation that we're like, hey, this doesn't feel right. You know, any wisdom there?
Yeah, absolutely. So if as an individual, if you're looking at if some things don't feel right, yeah, obviously the big thing is taking an action in the right direction, right, and listening to the intuitive signals. And a lot of times, well, I don't want to say a lot of times. It all depends on the person. In my case, none of the time do I ever worry about what people think about it, right? For other people, a lot of the times it does matter. And you really have to separate yourself from those people who don't really understand the decision you're making, but you're making a decision for yourself. And if you are making a decision and it's going to result in failure because you ignored your intuition, great, because that is all things that need to be parked in the subconscious area of your brain as lessons from failure, right? That was the whole premise of my first book. And so it's taking all those as you move forward. In a group setting, you're going to get dynamics from a whole bunch of people. So I've got a really good set of groups. We've got probably 5 close families, and I've got varying levels of closeness from them based on the intuitive signals, right? So some are great to have in the group setting. Others we'll get together often, very often, because we're very, very close. And that's where the values are shared. We enjoy each other's company. It doesn't necessarily mean that we have to get into deep conversations. But for me, I can speak personally when I go to one of my best buddies, I don't think about, intuitionology. I don't think about stuff like that. And so for me, it's really amazing to be there because I'm relaxed. I can be myself. We share the same kind of jokes a bit. So for me, these are important. And there's others where I don't have a free flowing conversation. And so it's great. We enjoy as a group. But it's not someone I get close with. So this is where I really kind of pay attention to those things that I think about. A lot of times the signals are signs of uncomfortableness. It doesn't necessarily have to ring like a bell. So that uncomfortableness is also something. Is that uncomfortableness a good uncomfortableness or is it a bad uncomfortableness? And so again, we're getting splitting hairs when it comes to intuition. But somewhere in your past, you've had that uncomfortableness before. So when you went with that uncomfortableness, that particular version of it, at whatever it is, because it's intangible and it led to a good decision. Okay, that uncomfortableness is a positive signal. So that's when you make a decision that seems uncomfortable, but because it's positive, because of the past experience I've had, I know that I can break through that uncomfort because that's the right decision to make. So that's where looking at the past experience is really important. That's where really distilling down to what these feelings are, these intuitive signals. And it's also going to, and going through other situations are going to give you some more signals. And perhaps you get down to a basic signal that you're always going to now start to trust, because you can ignore all the other signals down the line, because now you're becoming a little bit more of an expert in your intuition, right? And so that's what happens when you start practicing about learning these intuitive signals. You get better and better, and you get faster, and then you strip away the people that don't really matter, because you're selecting the things that you want to get into because of who you are. And there's also the one thing we have to be careful is to, and this is where the intuitive hurdles come into play, to make sure that you don't say, well, intuition led me down that decision. And so when I'm doing my interviews for my podcast my podcast series, some people think that intuition's led them to the wrong path. And so one of my earlier guests was Mark Metry. And Mark's got a pretty popular podcast of his own. And so he was one that experienced social anxiety, and he basically lied in high school. This guy was making 5 figures in high school, and he still needed to lie to fit in. And so he started by saying, well, intuition led me down the path to lying. And then that led him to almost take his own life, because he just didn't want to be part of the group. And I said, well, Mark, let's replay the podcast interview, because I'm happy to do that later. But one of the first things you said before you started telling me about your lies is, I knew I shouldn't have, but when you made that statement, you're telling me your intuition told you that you shouldn't have. and you went down the rabbit hole of not listening to it to the point where you almost took your life in high school. So when you look at those times when people have failed and they say they kind of quote unquote blame it on intuition, it's usually one of those four intuitive hurdles that are the culprits that got them to take those decisions, and not intuition, because their intuition would have told them at the start, this is not a good decision. And that's what they ignore. And sometimes that's a little bit of a whisper. And that's what Oprah calls it, a whisper, that kind of, I don't know, but I'm going to do it anyways. And this could be just something mental in your mind. And that could be just a slight slope going down, or you've hit a slope that is just going to accelerate you and spiral you further down, down, and down. And you're not looking up to see the bright light that intuition is telling you, okay, you've gone down this slide. Here's how you get out of it. And you're just looking down. You're not even looking at intuition. You make the next bad decision. You don't look at intuition, those signals telling you get out of it. And that's now how you end up hitting rock bottom.
Wow. Yeah, that's fascinating. So I may have missed. I definitely wrote down the first two intuitive hurdles: fear and ego.
Yep.
Did you say there were four?
There were four. The other ones is being too emotional, okay, and being too rational.
Okay, I did write that down. I wrote that down, and okay. Too emotional and too rational. Boy, I've definitely done both of those things.
Yes.
My dad's one of those, that's very rational, and he'll always, which is probably good because it balances me out. I'm definitely a little bit more impulsive than the old man, but he's always, kind of like said, to almost ignore your emotions. And I'm like, well, that can't be exactly right.
Yeah.
But it really, I think, right, should ultimately things should line up between our heart and mind. That's at least, the philosophy that I try and apply as often as I possibly can. And I think that's as simplistic as that is. It's obviously not always easy to do. I would like to maybe talk a little bit about the creative intuition, something I'm very passionate about. I love writing. I love telling stories, doing comedy, things like that. So maybe that's something we could talk about a little bit, if that's all right. Cool.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. So what creative intuition ultimately does is it helps you make that decision that you need to make. And it could be something as simple as being, just going left or right. Or in the case where you're looking to say, okay, where am I going to go with my talents? So one of the things that intuition really works on is, obviously there's goals that you want to do. And people talk about, following your passion. But that passion has to be met with some kind of a purpose. So what's the purpose? What do you want to do? Because intuition is in the present moment. A lot of people talk about it, but they're not. And we talked about earlier about my friend Hal, who had almost died from COVID-19, right? And so for him, it was being in that present moment to live, right? His intuition saying that he should live. So it's taking your passion in the present moment, and what purpose are you doing? What are you? How are you trying to affect the world? What are you trying to help other people with? What kind of value do you want to give them? And when you do that, and there's an actual value that people are going to actually pay you for or spend time with, that's when your passion is matched with a purpose. And that's when you start making the decisions to move ahead, to provide that value. And that value has to be, if it's a career, that value has to be, in some cases, something that the other person values, that they exchange money for. And so this is where, for businesses, when they get into a two-way, intuition's a two-way street. So very much like, my intuition is looking to you to see if you're trusted. You're doing this exact same thing. So as an artist or a writer, what words or what art are you painting, assuming it's painting, that's going to create value for that other person, that immerses them in something so emotional that they're going to give you $100 for, or they're going to read and dive deeper into your world because you triggered something. There's an emotional, intuitive connection that's saying, this guy's really interesting. And you just look at thumbing through social media. What stops you? Okay, so it could be cat videos or what have you, but what stops you and then reads the words? Then what stops you, reads the words, and dives deeper into that relationship? If the words don't match what that person is selling, you're gone, right? And so there's a lot of charlatans on social media doing that. Oh, yeah. I made $50,000, blah. I've done this, I've done that. Great, but they, and then they've got the chains and the Lamborghini, and then what they show, or unfortunately, people invest money and they don't get the value. they're not going to tell other people, and you've lost the game because you're chasing bottom feeders now. So this is where you really have to develop a deep relationship. What's your purpose? And then that purpose drives you. And I'll give you a very good example.
Mm-hmm.
My 14-year-old daughter runs an official federal nonprofit agency, and she took her art, her love for art, to she got affected by people in India who didn't have arms, and she basically said, "Wow, they are painting so like it's this art is amazing, and people think that they're disabled. Why should they think this is disabled? I want to affect people with disabilities and illnesses." And so she says, "Dad, I want to do something for these people with disabilities and illnesses." I said, as usual, I said, "Okay, what's your intuition telling you? When it's there, when it strikes you, you get that intuitive moment, you let me know what it is." And so that was December of 2018. June of 2019, we're sitting playing board games, and she just stares at the TV. And I'm just thinking she's just daydreaming. She whips her head over and says, "Dad, I'm ready." I said, "Okay, what are you ready for?" And she tells exactly how she wants to start heartification, or what she wants to do with the art. She wants to write pop-up. She wants to have pop-up events where she can have people that would people who are those disabilities and illnesses can come and paint for an hour, just express themselves to feel special. So we had a fundraiser. She raised 5,000. She was expecting 2,500. All her originals were sold within an hour because people came for the story, and they just got so enamored in that emotional connection that she did very, very well. And then when we had the pop-up event, probably the most cathartic moment for her was there's a fellow by the name of Carl who had cerebral palsy, and he was starting to paint, and he didn't paint. He's this 40-year-old guy. He hadn't done any painting since he was in high school, and his left arm is just violently shaking. And then he tells Avni, "Come here, let me show you what the event is doing for me." And he starts to paint, and his left arm starts stopping. It stopped, and he said, "My brain is just open, and it's just channeling, and I'm painting, and I feel free. And thank you so much for what you're doing."
Wow.
And that passion of art, purpose, right? Who cares about the money? Who cares about raising funds? Because she felt so good in that moment. That's what her intuition is helping her do. So take that same feeling, that same momentum, and put it into art, in writing. And that's the vision you should have. How do I want to affect that person with my words? How is my painting going to make that person feel? How's my product or service going to help that person solve a problem that is so needing? And how do I make my messaging, my marketing, my website, how I speak to them congruent with that? Because it's in the congruency that intuition is going to pick up on. If it's not congruent, like a lot of companies are doing today, I'm not buying your stuff. I'm not going to tell you. And I'm going to tell my other friends that I'm not buying your stuff. And now you've lost a whole whackload of people that are potential customers because you're gaming the system. And again, now you're back to getting bottom feeders because they'll come in, they'll buy your stuff. Okay. They're going to look to your competitors. And now you've just opened the door for competitors because they're beating you to the game because they're providing what I need. And if they are, I've deepened that relationship. So again, let's go back to opportunity cost. It's not that you're going to attract me with your product again. You have to extract me from the value I'm already getting from a competitor. We're back to 2 times the cost of getting me back as a customer.
Wow, that's fantastic. Yeah, I think of a quote, everything made with soul is very expensive. And when you're talking about passion and purpose being linked together, I mean, that's so important to me, especially right now, with everything going on. The gift of intuition, I really believe in a force sort of that is underpinning everything that's happening within each and every person, that whether you listen to this over here or that over there, doesn't matter. If you can learn to hone in on this intuition on our heart, then I think that we're all getting the messages that we need to be receiving,
Absolutely.
which is just beautiful. And I love what you've done to make this so consumable and really honestly, like as far as like the nuances of intuition, because a lot of these sensations that you're speaking of, I've certainly experienced myself, whether it be the hair on the back of my neck. Believe it or not, I have some, or I have more on my back, but um, but yeah, whether it be that or just the slight uncomfortableness, as well as the just ringing, like, what I'm doing now is putting together basically a community. I've done the hashtag get coached as a kind of an absurd, silly thing, because I don't really want to be in charge of anybody or tell anybody anything, but I do want to build a community and basically bring people together who want to be a part of that community. And as we kind of go through what is unfolding, have like just a strong, based sort of group of people who want to, help each other along. And I've got a bit of an outline that, like we're going to learn about this. I've put about 8 years of research into models basically of reality. So we're going to explore all that. But I ultimately like look forward to learning from all the people who are part of the group as much as I look forward to talking about some of these concepts, because I am passionate about it. But like that purpose truly being like our center of gravity and igniting it with passion, like that is an unbeatable combination. I think it's beautiful that you've allowed your daughter, or given her the opportunity to be able to pursue something like that, that they have that sort of freedom, in your home, in your environment, to link that together, to go for it. That's brilliant. The fact that she, of course, a bunch of money more than she expected came in, because she's not focused on that. She's focused on serving that passion, that intuition that led her down that path. And that's going to obviously ignite a much bigger chain of events than her trying to strategically manipulate, a bunch of people in order to give her money, because obviously people are going to sniff that out, because their intuition is going to tell them that that's out of resonance. It's not congruent.
Yeah.
So I just think that is absolutely brilliant. And I'm signing up for your 7-day challenge right now.
Amazing. Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent.
I'm super excited about it. And maybe hopefully you could come and chat with us as a group at some point. We can
For
talk
sure.
about that.
Absolutely. I'm happy to answer any questions. People take the challenge. They don't take the challenge, get the ebook. They don't, who cares? We'll set it up. Happy to answer any questions and really, really dig deep. It's very, very important that, my whole goal is to help as many people as I can, one person at a time. And whether it's just by listening to me or seeing a quote on my thing, as long as I can get that wave of change, that's good enough for me. And again, there's that purpose, right? My purpose, that's it. And if I can help other people do that, fantastic.
I think it's beautiful. I'm very much in alignment with what you're trying to do. Or what you're doing. Excuse me. I've got to eliminate that word from my vocabulary. I've been catching that a lot lately. I really appreciate what you're doing. I think it's beautiful. I think it's the gift to
Thank
give.
you.
And if there's any way I can help with what you're doing, I'm more than happy to do it. So folks, at Intuitionology, I'm going to put all the links in the show notes. And like I said, I'm going to be signing up for the 7-day challenge.
Excellent.
Right now. Sunil, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate
No problem at all.
Unbelievable. Cool. All right. All right. I'm going to stop.